Hi guys, today we're going to talk about the motor learning process. So you'll know you've achieved some success today after this lesson if you can understand what a neuron is and how it fits into the learning process, if you can recall the different types of memory that we have and how they are relevant, and understand how overlearning works and how it is applied to sport. So the learning process, the brain is made up of neurons. So as you can see here, that is your standard looking human brain, but if you actually zoom in closer, what it's actually made up of is all billions and billions of neurons. So what happens with these neurons is that electrical information is transferred along the neuron and then in between synapses, which is like junctions between two of these cells. So those electrical impulses happen in response to sensory information. So your eyes might perceive something and that sends electrical impulses across certain neurons in order to create some sort of a thought and a reaction. Okay? Now there are millions and millions of different neural pathways that happen as a result of different stimulus. So when motor learning occurs, new neural pathways are laid down in the brain. Now that's really important because the strength of those neural pathways is determined by practice. If you're learning a new skill, the pathway needs to be laid down first and foremost, and then it becomes strengthened, and then we make additional connections based on our training process. But when we are learning, yes, we're using these neurons and we're laying down additional neural paths, but it's important to know that we have different types of memory that also influence the learning process. So we've got short-term and long-term memory. So in short-term memory, it's also known as the active or the working memory. It has really limited storage capacity and information is lost if it's not rehearsed or encoded. So you imagine somebody telling you a lengthy phone number and they tell it to you once and you've got to try and remember it. That's short-term memory. If you don't continue to rehearse it, that information will be lost. So we'll have a quick little humorous break. We're just going to watch the IT crowd and the emergency number and see what you think would happen if you didn't rehearse this number.
Has this ever happened to you? From today, dialing 999 won't get you the emergency services. And that's not the only thing that's changing. Nicer ambulances, faster response times and better looking drivers mean they're not just the emergency services, they're your emergency services. So, remember the new number. That's
I've had a bit of a tumble.
Well, that's easy to remember. 0118 999 88199 9119 7253.
So as you can see, if you didn't really rehearse that number over and over, I don't think that you'd have much success in remembering that number. So retention of information, in order to encode information and transfer it from short-term to long-term memory, we need to do things like rehearse it, for example, that number, to say it over and over and over again. Maybe eventually you would remember it. Visualize it, so either by reading it or writing it down over and over again, or make additional connections to the information. So for example, when that music was attached to the number, it might have increased chance of long-term retention. So long-term memory, it stores a large amount of information as opposed to short-term memory, which had a really limited capacity, can be recalled after a long period of time, provided the information's been encoded and rehearsed correctly. Okay, so if you think of a song that was maybe number one many, many years ago, if it came on the radio today, you'll probably find that you remember most of the words because you would have rehearsed those words over and over and over again because it would have been overplayed on the radio and you would have sung to it every time. This sort of information is really important for coaching. So knowing that the rehearsal needs to be consistent and continuous in order for the information to transfer to long-term memory. In terms of retaining information, it's also really important that we take into account a few other factors like meaningfulness. If information is given to you and you don't find any meaning within that information, it makes no sense to you or you don't feel it's relevant, you won't retain that information, particularly if you think it's not of high importance at that moment in time. You need to then try and make additional connections to information that you might have previously for you to connect meaning to that information. Feedback is important for retention. It needs to be immediate though, otherwise the information is lost. And the feedback can be either intrinsic, so within yourself, so you realizing that, okay, when I did that serve, I actually held the ball, when I did that set, I actually held the ball instead of actually setting it. Next time I will. Creating that action based on reflection, or it can be extrinsic, so a friend or a coach telling you what went wrong and how to improve it, or it could be extrinsic as well by looking at visual feedback, so recording yourself and having a look. Overlearning is really, really important. If we learnt to, say in tennis, if Roger Federer learnt to serve in tennis, and then thought, well, I've learnt to serve, I'm pretty accurate now, I will stop my training in terms of tennis serving, he would actually eventually lose that information. So it's important that we overlearn. You know that all of the pro tennis players are still training very, very regularly, and that is overlearning because the pathways that we've laid down are continually modified. So continuing to practice even after you've learnt the skill, storing information because it's continually being updated, and knowing that motivation and meaning actually affect the success of overlearning. So if it's something that you find boring, then that's going to affect motivation, that'll go down, or if it's a skill or a drill that you can't connect meaning to within that sport, your motivation will go down and overlearning will not be successful. So overall, that's modal learning as a whole. Go in search of more information, make sure that you have got all of the notes down that you need, and we'll see you in class.